and get started with our event for this evening. So good evening and thank you for joining us tonight for Racial Inequity in Action in Maryland, hosted by the Howard County Library System. So wonderful to see all of your wonderful faces here this evening. And we've got two powerhouse panels that are going to be engaging with us on this evening. I'm Brooke McCauley, the Customer Experience Manager with the Howard County Library System, where our mission is to provide high quality education for all. We have been providing racial equity programming and information and educational tools for the community for some time, and are happy and pleased to bring this evening's event here for you tonight. So with that, I'm going to dive into a few housekeeping rules for this evening. First piece is we want you to know that this event is being recorded. It will be shared on YouTube and you'll be able to take a look at this a little bit later on, and we hope that you share it with your friends. Also, we would encourage you to please share your questions via chat. Our event staff is going to be holding on to those, and we'll be asking those questions of the panelists after they finish speaking. And at the end of this event, we're going to be sending out a follow-up email that's going to have some wonderful resources and links for you to be able to follow up with what's going on at the library, as well as with some of the partner organizations that you're going to hear from tonight. We love the opportunity to get members of our community involved with what's going on, and we hope that you're feeling inspired and hopeful and excited to be engaged tonight. So we're going to have two panels, as I touched on. The first panel, and again, these topics are going to overlap a bit, but the first panel is going to touch on policy at the state level as it relates to racial equity. And we're going to hear from three individuals who are working on a variety of topics. And we're going to see as we move through the night again that all of these areas intersect. In the second panel, we're going to hear from individuals representing organizations that are really fighting at that grassroots level. They're working on policy as well, but they're looking to engage with you and other members of the community towards fighting for racial justice, social justice, and important issues of our time. We know that we've just gotten through a very heated election, but the reality is for those of us who have been engaged in this work, we know that when the election ends, that's when the real work actually begins, because that's when you have to hold those folks who you've elected accountable. But even if the folks who you wanted to get elected did not get elected, it's still time to follow up on what's going on at the policy level so that we can continue to make an impact in our communities. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. Just a few quick things about myself. Again, I'm here as the Customer Experience Manager for the Howard County Library System. Prior to serving in this role, I worked with Maryland Hunger Solutions for 7 years as their senior manager, working in Annapolis and around the state on anti-hunger, anti-poverty work, which has a direct connection with racial equity work, actually. And prior to that, spent many years as an activist, marching and doing voter registration and action and turning out the vote in my local community back home in Detroit and here in Maryland. So this is a wonderful evening, a wonderful event, and I'm excited to engage with everyone here. So let's go ahead and begin. We're going to be recording, and I encourage you to please submit your questions in the chat. So our first panel, we're going to kick off with Ms. Shamoyia Gardiner. Shamoyia serves as the Deputy Director for Strong Schools Maryland. She is a former educator from Miami, Florida, and she also served at the Advocates for Children and Youth doing educational policy, as well as at the Institution for Higher Educational Policy. So welcome, Shamoyia. Next, we'll go to Ben Orr. He is the founder, president, and CEO of Maryland Center on Economic Policy. He served as the interim director, the transition coordinator, and policy analyst for the Maryland Budget and Tax Policy Institute. Prior to that, he worked at the Brookings Institution's Metropolitan Policy Program. And then finally, we're going to close out this opening panel with Ms. Korey Johnson, who is a senior policy research analyst for the Job Opportunities Task Force. She received her law degree from Howard University, and she served as an attorney with the Department of Justice in their honors program. She also served as a legislative aide with the Maryland General Assembly and a policy research instructor. So let's welcome our opening panel, and we're going to go ahead and kick off with Shamoyia. Shamoyia, what do you guys have going on over there? What policies are you working on? Let's hear from you first.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Brooke. And hey to everyone on the call, I'm Shamoyia. I'm very excited to be here with you all. So Strong Schools Maryland is an organization that is specifically focused on achieving a world-class education for every single child that attends public school in the state of Maryland. Right now, what that looks like for us is we are very focused on the override fight for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is a transformative, literally once in a generation bit of legislation that the General Assembly passed earlier this year, and the governor then vetoed for a variety of reasons, which we'll delve into. How much time I got, Brooke?
You got 5 to 7 minutes.
All right, let's do this thing. Let me get my timer going. So first, let me talk to you all a little bit about the background of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. So the Kerwin Commission, Blueprint, all of these terms that you've been hearing over the last couple years are just the most recent in a very, very long history of a struggle for racially equitable educational outcomes here in Maryland. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the state constitution mandates that it is the state's responsibility to provide for a free public system of education, meaning that it is the state's responsibility to fund our public schools. Along the way, across many, many years, that burden has shifted. So instead you have a split, a joint partnership between the state and local governments when it comes to fully funding our public schools. Unfortunately, what we saw in places like Baltimore City, Prince George's County, and Caroline County, and even some of our rural jurisdictions like Somerset and Dorchester County, excuse me, I live near a hospital, is that these jurisdictions were not receiving the full fund that they needed, bottom line. And that means that the outcomes we saw for students attending school in these jurisdictions, which should have been the same, should have been high quality outcomes for everyone, were not. And it was entirely dependent on where students lived and whether they attended schools that had high concentrations of students of color. If that was the case, they were more likely to be underfunded over time. The ACLU and many other advocates brought the Bradford lawsuit against the state, and the ruling was handed down that said the state of Maryland needed to do better. What we saw as a result of that was the formation of the Thornton Commission, which was way back in the early 2000s for those of you who were paying attention back then. And what they did was respond to that court ruling and say, okay, we need to invest in our schools. Here's a ton of funding. And that worked for a little while. But it's worth noting that Thornton was just funding. So we saw some gains in Baltimore City and Prince George's County and Caroline County as well. But when the 2008 recession hit, the state had to look to places to cut funding. And unfortunately, legislators and all policymakers determined that it was acceptable to make cuts to education and stop the full implementation of that new Thornton funding, which meant that we rolled all the way back to where we were before we started. Students of color were not receiving the resources they needed in their schools, therefore were not achieving the outcomes that we expected and hoped for them. We saw that teachers were less satisfied with their placements, and we saw ultimately that a lot of programs that serve schools, including wraparound services and out-of-school time programs, lost funding, ultimately went away, and then brought us to where we formed the Kerwin Commission. And the responsibility was only to do two things: update our funding formula so that we have the resources we need in our schools, but then also to make some recommendations to create that world-class system of education that we at Strong Schools Maryland are fighting for. And unfortunately, that does not equate with solving racially inequitable issues in public education. The Blueprint is not a panacea. It is a critical first step for Maryland to take meaningful steps forward and actually make progress in addressing the racial inequities that exist in our public school system. So I will very, very quickly go over some of the recommendations of the Kerwin Commission that made it into the Blueprint. First, early childhood education. We know that a strong foundation is absolutely what it takes to set our students up for success, and every child deserves that. So the Blueprint goes a long way towards establishing a universal system of pre-K for every low-income 3- and 4-year-old child in this state. It does not matter your citizenship status. It does not matter your ability to speak English. It does not matter if you require an IEP or special accommodations. If you're between 3 and 4 years old and you are ready to go to pre-K, you should be able to have a slot, and that's what the blueprint would do. In addition to that, they would expand Judy centers, which are school-based places that provide for early learning for children who are not quite ready to go into pre-K yet, which, given that we have a huge childcare crisis right now, is really, really important. But beyond that, it also expands family support service centers, which are intergenerational ways to address the needs of families and really comprehensively address the needs of the whole child. We can't treat our students as if they're individual little buttons and you push a lever and then you get a certain outcome. They're whole human beings and they're a part of family systems that require support, and the blueprint would do a lot to expand those services offered. Second, we know that we need to highly diversify our teacher and educator workforce, period. I don't know how we expect students of color, who are more than half of the enrollment in Maryland public schools, to learn from people who are 70% white, who do not look like them, who do not have the same cultural background that they do, and who in some instances may not even value who students are, the families that they come from, and may see them as different or other. So the blueprint puts a lot of funding towards diversifying the educator workforce, which includes teachers, but also includes paraprofessionals, librarians, counselors, etc. So it does that, but it also institutes a new career ladder, because we are requiring that teachers that they meet a lot more certifications than they currently do. So right now, you don't have to do any sort of implicit bias training in order to become a teacher in Maryland public schools. It's just not necessary. You don't have to reckon with racial inequity at all. But the blueprint does modify some of the requirements it takes to become a certified teacher in the state, stating that you have to go through certain trainings. You must be trained in restorative practices. Those of you familiar with school discipline and the school to prison pipeline know the importance of teachers and other educators having options that are not just pushing kids out of school in terms of securing racially equitable outcomes. So we will get highly trained teachers who are recruited from our HBCUs. All of our HBCUs in the state have education colleges that we can be pulling from. Instead, we're allowing a brain drain right now. So we would have folks who were grown in Maryland who are committed to our students and our communities and who look like and can relate to the students they're serving, populating our classrooms. And we also know that we're asking a lot of these folks, so they would do additional training, they would get additional certification at the national level, and we hope to see racially equitable outcomes as a result of that. I can talk more about career and technical education. There is a whole lot in the blueprint to ensure that dual enrollment programs continue, which can allow students who come from low-income families to have more access to college courses without having to pay for them at all, which is an amazing thing that I personally have benefited from and seen the positive outcomes that can yield for students. The blueprint will also ensure that students who choose a career path because they don't want to go to college, they want to go to work right away, graduate with an industry recognized certification that enables them to get to work the next day. They don't have to do any additional programs after that. They don't have to jump through any more hoops. They will be ready because the education they will have been provided will be enough to qualify them to work. There is an entirely new line of funding called concentration of poverty, which is included in the formula as described in the blueprint, which is the first. It makes Maryland the first state in the nation to even address concentrations of poverty, which disproportionately impact Black and Brown students at a statewide level. We would literally be the first in the nation. And the only thing standing between us and that is the governor's veto. There is also a lot in the way of governance and accountability. And when we talk about racial equity and policy, we have to talk about implementation, governance, and accountability, because we always put the responsibility on the people who are being served to be accountable. Show us these test scores, show us that you spent this money correctly. But the blueprint also ensures that we're putting accountability back on the state and on local governments and school systems for doing the things that they need to do in a timely fashion so that we can then see the outcomes we want for our students. Unfortunately, all of that is currently on hold because of Governor Hogan's veto. So Strong Schools is currently leading a fight to override the veto. We hope to do this at the beginning of the next legislative session, which starts up on January 13th. I'm going to share it in the chat because I may have gone over my time. A lot of actions that anyone on this call can take. You can record your own personal story about why finding this is important to you, email your lawmakers, and much more. Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you, Shamoyia. And we'll circle back at the end of the three panelists to talk a little bit more about how folks can get involved with the work that you're doing. And I'd also love to hear a little bit more about what's going on with virtual learning as well, but we'll swing back to that piece, okay? So now we're going to go ahead and hear from Benjamin Orr. Let's talk a little bit about what your organization is working on and how racial equity and the budget and the economy all play in together.
Great, thank you, Brooke. It's always good to be with you and everybody else on this call. I am the founder, president, chief executive of the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. I founded MDCEP back in 2013 in the belief that all Marylanders should be able to achieve their full potential in a healthy economy that offers a widely shared and rising standard of living. And it's impossible for us to achieve our mission without using a racial, ethnic, and gender equity lens. For us, this means a variety of activities internally in the policies, processes, and trainings we use to consistently promote equity, but also more publicly in things like our Budgeting for Opportunity series, looking at the state's budget through a racial equity lens, to the section on equity that we now include in every piece of testimony we submit to the legislature. If your organization does analysis or testimony at the state or local level, or at the federal level, if you are so inclined, I encourage you to explicitly call out race, ethnicity, and gender too, throughout the document and potentially highlighting it separately. I just want to touch on a few things, and I'm not going to dive deeply into some of the things that Shamoyia brought up, but absolutely the blueprint and the work of the last 3 years of the Kerwin Commission is central to this conversation right now. We in our work for the in attempting to educate the commission and then the legislatures they considered the blueprint, we did research that showed that more than half of Black students in Maryland attend school in a substantially underfunded district compared to just 13% of white students. Connect that with what Shamoyia said about more than half of students are students of color in the state. We hope to see a reduction of this disparity soon once the legislature overrides the blueprint veto, although don't expect it immediately. But we recognize that more work will be required in order to eliminate it. There are parts of this state where Black workers spend an additional 55 hours per year commuting than their white neighbors because of the historical and ongoing underinvestment in public transit and other barriers erected by public policy. When it comes to taxes, my organization, we spend a lot of time thinking about fiscal policy. And when it comes to Maryland's state and local taxes, we actually ask the least of those most able to pay. And so fixing our upside down tax system is the right thing to do and would allow the state to increase its investments in the programs and services that are the foundation of our economy: education, healthcare, transportation, et cetera. And then, of course, there is state and local response to COVID. And, when we look at this from an economic perspective, the ranks of the unemployed but looking for work Marylanders have tripled over the summer. Many others left the workforce entirely, especially women who shouldered an unequal burden as schools closed. Nationally, we see that the Black unemployment rate jumped to 15.4% compared to a peak of just over 10% among white workers. And this was at the same time that Black and brown communities were being hardest hit by coronavirus because of the impacts of structural racism, including chronic underinvestment in healthcare in Black communities, being pushed to live in poorer neighborhoods with worse housing stock and greater air pollution, and simply the stressful toll of being Black in a racist, in a country founded on racist principles. So for us, we are focused on a couple of things as we enter the new legislative session. And I'll mention this is going to be a very weird legislative session because it's going to be remote. And so when we are talking about how to get involved in these issues this year, that doesn't mean you have to drive down to Annapolis. This year, it means you need to contact your legislator by email or by phone or however, and we're all going to share different ways to do that. But the things that MDCEP is focused on this year is overriding the governor's vetoes of the blueprint, as well as the revenue package that we led the fight on to pay for Kerwin and the blueprint, as well as the increased funding for HBCUs and some other things. To keep working on revenues, because even the things that were passed and then vetoed by the governor did not necessarily improve the fairness of our tax system. And we need that revenue both to make it fair, to make better investments, and also to protect services at a time of crisis. Creating paid family leave at a time when it couldn't be more critical, and looking to policies like paid sick leave and worker protections for essential workers who have very clearly been shown to be very vulnerable and some of the lowest paid workers in our economy at this time. Briefly, at the end of my time here, I just wanted to mention two other opportunities that folks may be interested in. The first is that Howard County has created a equity task force. I actually have one of my staff members is serving on this task force. It, I think, just had its first meeting earlier tonight. So I would encourage folks to pay attention to that. I'm going to throw that into the chat with the link to follow that. And the last thing I'll say is to offer folks, we are actually having our annual policy summit Thursday. And the topic is building an anti-racist economy. Folks may be very interested in that panel discussion as well. And so I'll throw the link into the chat for that as well. It's a free event and is just some amazing panelists. I think it'll be a really interesting discussion, but looking forward to the discussion here tonight and the questions and other presenters. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Just a reminder to please put your questions into the chat and we'll be able to come back to those after our next speaker. And with that, we're going to move to Ms. Korey Johnson. Korey, take it away. Let's hear about what's going on at JOTF and Justice. Hello.
Thank you so much, Brooke, and we're so excited to be here. Thank you to Howard County Library for inviting us. This discussion is so important, specifically now in the turn of just like where politics is going, sort of like some of the racial, issues that are happening, the tension in our country. Excited to be here, excited to be in the discussion. Before talking about our policy, here at JOTF, we think it's very important to understand that policy does not happen in a vacuum. Oftentimes when we talk about legislative initiatives, we talk about things that could make, conditions better, make people better, make communities better in a vacuum. And it's important here, at least, for us to understand. And I think that this is important for anybody looking to have a policy orientation towards changing issues in their community, is understanding that issues are not new, but they are informed by the historicity of social inequity in society. And so some of the most pressing issues that are impacting African Americans today are not new issues. Specifically, we're even talking about COVID-19. These are not new issues. They're exacerbated issues from prior historical issues. And so here at JOTF, we pride ourselves on understanding the historicity of social inequity and then implementing that in our policy. So a little bit about JOTF. Currently, what our focus is creating meaningful employment. Right now, specifically for low wage, low skill workers, that often tends to be African Americans. Again, as I spoke about, social inequity in this country, understanding the US economy and the way that it has developed from, through the transatlantic slave trade and, slavery contributing to a large portion of America's GDP through, moving to indentured servitude, sharecropping and other mechanisms of control to, the discrepancy in pay that we're seeing now, the wealth gap, all of that good stuff. Some of our policy initiatives well, most of our policy initiatives are geared towards that. We have some, I'll do an overview of our policy initiatives, and then I'll talk about two specific ones that are really, really important to this conversation. So right now, our policy agenda looks like the unit rule repeal, which prohibits the Maryland judiciary case search from referring to the existence of records of a charge in a case with electronic records if the charge resulted in acquittal, dismissal, and that's important because if people are charged with, in a group of things that were then dismissed, if they can't get that expunged from that record, that's a problem, and that marks their ability to get a job in the future. We will be supporting paid sick days, and we can talk about that later. I know we talked about having a discussion about COVID-19 and the impact on the Black workforce. We will also be supporting diminution credits, which allows current inmates an opportunity to get a 60-day reduction, a 90-day reduction for obtaining a degree, a diploma, or a certification for those that are incarcerated. We are also working through an auto insurance non-driving factors, which essentially allows for us to eliminate credit history as a cost determining factor in auto insurance premiums. We will also be supporting legislation in Annapolis regarding GPS monitoring, which is requiring indigency determinations in pretrial, which is very important specifically, and anyone who would want the link to our decriminalizing poverty report that we issued in 2018, which talks specifically about how the criminal justice system has been able to criminalize poverty, i.e. if someone can't afford to pay something, then they end up being recycled back into the system. So if I'm, racially profiled or pulled over and then hit with a fine, if I can't pay it, then that requires a little bit, there's a never ending cycle, specifically for our indigency determinations for GPS monitoring. Currently, GPS monitoring costs about it differs per jurisdiction, but it goes upward from $15 a day. If you don't have that money, then you will go back to jail. And so that is the type of criminalization of poverty, where if you can't pay, your freedom is denied because of that. And what does that look like for low-income Black communities? I'm sorry, I wasn't watching the time, but I'll hurry up. We're also supporting automatic expungement for non-convictions. If you aren't convicted of something, it shouldn't stain your record. And then the last thing that we've really been working on is the Criminal Justice Debt Elimination Prevention Act of 2021. We're still waiting on our board to approve our agenda, so I won't get too deep in the woods on that, but it's essentially an elimination of fines and fees for pretrial and things of that nature in the criminal justice system, because it is unduly burdensome to poor community members and indigent community members. So I'm excited to have, a conversation about all of that. If anyone has any specific questions about our agenda, be more than happy to discuss it. I can't wait to talk about COVID-19.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Korey. So with that, let's see. It doesn't look like we have any questions from the audience yet. So let me do this, because I know we have people who are in the event tonight who may not have any experience with working with policy or getting involved in Annapolis. And so, hearing us talk about it probably sounds a little daunting. So one, I'd like to hear from you if there are any specific opportunities to plug in with your organizations, but also let's give folks a little bit more of an understanding of what it means to get involved and to participate, in hearings and even in the drafting of bills and the budget process. What does it really mean to hold our legislators accountable and become a part of the process? And I'm going to open that up for any of the three of you to just kind of dive right in, and feel free to piggyback off one of another.
Yeah, I feel comfortable starting out. So those of you on should be seeing the chat. Katie has shared a Linktree link to Strong Schools Maryland, and it'll take you to a web page where you can do a couple of things that are all forms of direct advocacy and should make you feel like you're doing something tangible and useful. Yeah, And I can definitely go into Jacqueline's question. I just got a private one. So first, you can record your story. If you are a person who cares about educational equity, who cares about the funding of public schools, all you need to do is get your cell phone or get on your laptop. You click that link, you go to strongschoolsmaryland.org. We have a tell your story link there. And you just talk for 30 seconds. Hi, my name is whatever your name is. And I am whatever you do for your day job. If you're retired, I'm a retired XYZ. And I really care about the blueprint for Maryland's future because I know that all children deserve a high quality education regardless of what zip code they live in. I need my legislators to override the veto of the blueprint. Done. That is your advocacy. And I cannot stress how important it is for legislators to see the faces and hear the voices of the people they represent, because all too often they're caught up in teeny tiny rooms with people like us and people who look like them. So just a bunch of other legislators and a bunch of other advocates who know how things work. And unfortunately, that disconnects all of us from reality. So when legislators have the opportunity to see and hear from you, it is impactful. And I promise you, the smallest thing, the smallest interaction will stick out to them. You can email your lawmakers and ask to set up meetings with them if you don't want to do a video either, or if you want to have a phone conversation, you can reach out to their staff. And that's all found on the General Assembly's website. So I'll pause here. I'm definitely going to get back to Jacqueline's question, but want others to answer this.
Thank you, Shamoyia. Ben, it looks like you're trying to jump in here, and I've got a couple questions as well.
Okay, I was just going to second what Shamoyia said and just emphasize how Annapolis may seem far away, but it is a very small place. And time again, I think those of us who work in Annapolis on a daily or basis or every session have seen the simplest interaction, one or two phone calls, somebody sharing a personal story make a huge difference. So I can tell you all about what the research says about why this is an important issue, what the right thing to do is to solve the problem. But what really moves people is that personal connection, that emotional connection with the story of a constituent who can tell them why this is an important issue. And so Shamoyia is absolutely right. Follow that link or find an organization that's working on issues you care about and share, or even just reach out directly and share your story, because that is what really moves the needle. All it takes is one or two stories. It does not have to be, this is not DC. We don't have to get 500,000 people flooding the phone lines. We need 5 sometimes. So that's absolutely true.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ben. I'm thinking about the story of Mr. 62 from when I worked with Maryland Hunger Solutions, and we fought for a bill that was going to increase the minimum amount that people got for food stamps from $15 a day, and we wanted to increase it to at least $30 a day per month. I'm sorry, $30 per month, yes. $15 per month. And there was a gentleman in the audience who we had brought with us to share testimony, who was a senior, and literally it was his testimony that got the bill dropped down from being seniors age 65 and up down to 62, because he was only 62 years old and could not benefit from the bill. So if he was not there that day and was not there to share his own personal story, then none of that would have gotten, that would not have gotten passed, and he would not have been able to benefit from the legislation. We've got a couple questions here on the side. Korey, were you getting ready to jump in with anything before I go to the questions?
You can go back to the questions. I was just going to echo what Shamoyia and Ben have already said, so we can just jump right into the questions.
Great. Well, let me do this while you still have your mute off. We had a question here. What does it's actually JOTF. Can you share what JOTF stands for?
JOTF stands for the Job Opportunities Task Force. And sorry that I didn't make that clear in the beginning, and I can drop our link below just in case anybody wants to connect. We are also accepting interns, shameless plug. So anyone who wants to, get a little bit more acclimated to Annapolis, even though Annapolis will be virtual this year, can definitely submit their resume and everything, and they can find all of the information online.
Excellent. And we also have a question from Monica about how the plan, what is the plan on overriding the veto for Kerwin? Does that just look like getting enough votes? What's the strategy, getting enough votes to override? What's the strategy on that?
Great question. I'm trying to answer stuff in the private chat as well. So in short, our strategy is to make sure that we have the 29 votes we need in the Senate. Nothing is ever absolute, especially in politics and policy, but we're fairly certain that with the 2018 election, all the new members we've got in the House of Delegates, that they are going to be willing to override the governor's veto because they have all, championed the blueprint. It's really a matter of making sure that we've got senators, state senators in key swing districts in areas like jurisdictions where is it Calvert and Hartford? I'm so bad at geography, but whenever there's a jurisdiction that overlaps and you've got a state senator like Katie Fry Hester, for example, who represents wildly different constituencies, she's going to find it very hard to make certain votes because on the one hand, her constituents in one district are totally on board with the governor, and on the other, her constituents are totally on board with students and teachers and really want to see this override happen, and a vote could cost her a seat. So it's really a matter of ensuring that we've got folks who are constituents of those specific legislators reaching out, making those contacts, saying, I really need you to vote for this, because what we're doing then is we're providing legislators that cover, that reasoning that they can offer in public. When a reporter says, why did you vote for this expensive legislation? Senator Hester can say, my constituents came to me and told me that this is critical, that this investment means that in 8 years, Maryland is going to receive the return on its investment, and we can expect that our high school graduates will be ready to enter the workforce because we've got new careers coming. So it's really a matter of doing that.
Thank you so much. So I want to do this before we need to move to our next panel. We're still taking questions. But I do want to ask Ben if you can just talk a little bit about the budget process in Annapolis and how people can get involved with that and what that even means, the budget process. What are we talking about here?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so the budget is the ultimate expression of our values as a state, right? Our budget is about $46 billion, and you and I are the primary folks who pay for it through income taxes, through sales taxes in particular. It is also how we invest in the building blocks of our economy, as we want to say, whether it's education or healthcare or transportation, public safety, all those things that make Maryland an attractive place to live, work, and play. The process is interesting and is in transition. Maryland currently has the strongest governor in the country when it comes to the state's budget process. Only the governor can add to the budget. No matter what legislators hear from their constituents, they cannot add money to the budget. They can only make cuts. That will change in 2 years because of a vote we all just took on the November ballot to change our state constitution to allow the legislature to also not only make cuts, but also make spending increases in programs that the legislature decides are a priority, not just the governor. That makes it a much more democratic process because the legislators are closer to their constituents. They have a smaller number of people they're trying to listen to. And they will still be under the restriction, the constitutional restriction to pass a balanced budget. So what this will mean is that while they may make increases in certain areas like education, they will have to make cuts in other areas to balance the budget potentially. But they'll be able to do that, and it'll be able to be a negotiation between the governor and the legislature instead of just the governor dictating what spending increases happen in a given year. The governor, in exchange, the governor will be able to line item veto items, and the legislature will have the opportunity to attempt to override those vetoes. The last thing I'll say is, I just talked about what happens during the legislative session. In actual fact, it will be the legislative session that happens between mid-January, mid-April will be much more important to the budget process and budget advocacy now than it has been in the past. Once the amendment goes into effect it goes into effect once Governor Hogan leaves office because he's term limited. But at the moment, it's really important to start advocacy over the summer and into the fall if there's an issue you care about, because state agencies draft the budgets and send them up to the governor, and then the governor decides what they want to do with it. And so it's important to get your perspective in front of the agencies as they're doing that, so that it ends up in front of the governor, so that whatever the governor submits to the legislature is reflective of your priorities. So for the next 2 years, it'll be particularly important to advocate over the summer and fall in agencies that you work with in your whatever issue that you care about. It will continue to be important, but it will be also be more important after in the 2023 legislative session and afterwards to educate your legislators, particularly on the budget committees, about whatever issue you care about, because they will have more power then, or it'll be more balanced between the governor and the legislature.
Okay. All right. So we're going to have to get ready to start to close this out. And if I can get each of you, I want to get each of you to share again, just briefly, how people can connect with your organizations and get involved with you. We did have 2 quick questions. If I can get someone to give just a 30-second response to these 2 quick questions. The first one is, there seems to be a lot of ways that we can enact change in policies, from different laws to court cases, policies at different levels. What seems to be the most effective way for a person to get involved and make change happen? I know that's a lot, but if someone can just give me a 30 to 45-second response to that person, that would be great.
I would say the most effective way is, one, to educate yourself on the issues. Oftentimes, I think that we get so caught up in the solution to problems that we don't understand kind of like the context that those issues sit in. And so I would say that, the first step would be educating myself on the issues that I am very, very passionate about. So if it's food inequity, if it's education, kind of understanding the context that those issues are happening in, and connecting with, and we're about to do a grassroots panel in a second, connecting with community members and finding out what they feel is the biggest issue and how to solve it and resolve it, and then taking that to policy. I think is kind of like the long short of it for us, is understanding the community's needs and educating ourselves on those issues, and then taking it to policy.
Okay, so policy as in legislation being the strongest. All right.
Exactly.
All right, great. Either of you two have a reaction? Again, I'm going to switch out in 5 seconds. Either of you two, reaction to that?
I would just say,
yes.
Go ahead.
That was my reaction. Yes.
Second, Shamoyia. Okay, Ben, 5 seconds.
Trust your expertise. Legislators and other, legislators consider thousands of bills every 90-day session. They can't be an expert in everything. If you know your stuff, you will be the expert in the room. Trust your knowledge, trust your local expertise.
Okay, so for that person who asked the question, it sounds like they're sharing, get educated around your issue and look to create policy at the legislative level as the most critical way to get involved and make change.
Depending on the issue, yes. Sometimes agency regulations can be more important, but yes, I would start by understanding the legislation.
But I would just also say, I'm sorry I know we're running over, but also I think that I don't think that there's a better, whether it's grassroots organizing or policy, I think that, whatever you feel is necessary to cure it, we need a both and solution.
Absolutely.
Just about every issue that is happening in the community. So I wouldn't say that policy is the only, but from a policy perspective, making sure you educate yourself on the issues confronting the community and then getting involved that way.
All right, thank you. So we are out of time. I do need to just ask you each this one question. We hopefully at the end of the second panel will have time for some more questions. I know there are a couple of people that I wasn't able to get to. I do apologize. But what is the best way for folks to connect with you and your organization? Please feel free to drop it in the chat.
I'm putting it in the chat right now.
Okay, or if you want to share out loud for 30 seconds, feel free. If there's something we missed, otherwise we're going to switch it up.
All right, strongschoolsmaryland.org. My email is shamoyia@strongschoolsmaryland.org. Reach out to me with any of your questions. There is nothing too small.
I will definitely drop everything in the chat box, but definitely www.jotf.org. I don't know if I said 3 W's, but 3 W's and then .jotf.org. And then Korey@JTOF is my email, and I'll drop that all in the chat box.
And I just threw a URL in the chat box as well, but just a final plug for our conversation on Thursday about building an anti-racist economy, which you can also find on the website.
Awesome, excellent. So let's give everyone on the opening panel a round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know how busy everyone is. If you have time to hang around and stick around to the end of the second panel, we'd love to have you. And with that, it's time to switch gears and talk to the folks who are organizing at the grassroots level. Let's hear from representatives from 3 powerhouse organizations. The first one we're going to hear from is Ms. Zainab Chaudry. She is with the Council on American-Islamic Relations. She's the director of Maryland Outreach. So happy to have her around today. She also serves on the advisory board of the Interfaith Action for Human Rights. She is a liaison to Shoulder to Shoulder, that initiative as well. And she's the first known Muslim to be appointed to the Maryland State Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. So welcome to you today. Next, we're going to hear from Kat Paul. She is the Research and Policy Analyst for CASA. She works with immigrant bills and legislation. She also is a contributor for the Baltimore Sun and on various radio programs. She's uplifting issues around the pandemic and its impact on the undocumented community. And then finally, we're going to close out with Mr. Willie Flowers, who is the president of the NAACP State Conference of Branches. He's also president of the Howard County NAACP. He serves as executive director for the Park Heights Community Health Alliance and also leads an initiative called the George Washington Carver Growing Food Together Community Supported Agriculture. So welcome to all 3 of you. We're going to kick it off with Zainab. Thank you so much. Let's hear about your organization. What are you all working on and how can we get engaged?
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much, Brooke, and thank you so much to the Howard County Library System for hosting tonight's convening. Thank you all of you for tuning in. You could be doing practically anything else on a Tuesday evening, and you chose to be here tonight with us to learn about how you can contribute to racial equity in our state. So thank you for your time as well. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here with all of you. I feel like I'm amongst friends working with so many different organizations in the fight for justice and equity in our state. To give you a little bit of more background information on CARE, the Council on American-Islamic Relations, we are the nation's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization. So we advocate for justice, equity, inclusion. We make sure that our communities are represented. We push back against hatred, bigotry, intolerance, xenophobia, racism. And a lot of our work is done in collaboration and conjunction with other communities as well. Communities of other faiths, other ethnicities, other religions, with the immigrant community as well. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting parts of this work, the opportunity to really be able to network and connect with so many different Americans and aspiring Americans from so many different walks of life. CARE is about 25 years old, almost 26 years old. Our office here in Maryland was founded in January of 2018. We've got about 30 some offices in about 20 some states around the country. And the Maryland office is actually part of the CARE National Headquarters based on Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. And we do a lot of work on the local, state, and federal level when it comes to policymaking, as well as legislation, and just interacting and engaging with diverse members of our communities. So our mission is to enhance the understanding of Islam, to protect civil rights, promote justice, and empower American Muslims to be more engaged members of society, right? When we talk about Islam and Muslims, a lot of people think, oh, Muslims are relatively new in our country, you know, only that the Muslim communities have only been around for the last several decades. The reality is that our faith has been part of our communities since our country, since before America's founding. So many thousands of Muslims were brought over against their will during the transatlantic slave trade, and they helped lay the foundation of our country and really found a way to practice their faith in the most oppressive of circumstances. And it's actually an example for American Muslims today who are struggling with xenophobia and Islamophobia and different forms of hatred and bigotry and intolerance, to really learn from the example specifically of the African American and the Black communities within our country who really have paved the way for not only Muslims, but so many other communities across the country who are struggling for justice and equity. So it's truly an honor to have so many mentors who are in that space who have really kind of guided my personal journey as well. So Maryland itself is home to about 200,000 Muslims, with the bulk of our communities residing in Baltimore, Howard, Montgomery, Prince George's, and Anne Arundel counties, as well as Baltimore City. We are probably, I believe, the most diverse faith community in the state, in the country, if not globally. And part of it is because there are so many different races and ethnicities that comprise the Muslim community. Our communities are not a monolith. I have a very close Jewish friend who once told me, she said, if you have 10 Jews in a room, you'll probably have 10 different opinions. And I told her, I said, if you have 10 Muslims in a room, you'll probably have 11 different opinions. And that's just a reflection of the fact that there are so many different opinions and our communities are not a monolith. And so that's something that we take into account as an organization when we advocate and fight for justice and equity, recognizing that that might not be the same for everybody, and trying to make sure that we do an adequate job of fairly representing different communities in this space is something that we take very seriously. So in this current political environment, obviously anti-Muslim bigotry and Islamophobia have become really pervasive features of American public life. And it's not a secret that whether it's in formal politics or the national media, especially over the course of the last 4 years, we've seen an emboldening of Islamophobia within our country, whether that comes through pop culture or Hollywood news media headlines, or whether that comes through policy-making, decision-making, whether it translates as school curriculum content, or whether it translates as bullying of children within schools, faith-based bullying of children in schools. It manifests in so many different ways. And unfortunately, the fact that there are so many misconceptions about Islam and Muslims within our country, it helps perpetuate a lot of the misinformation that's shared within these different spaces. So one of the big kind of focuses of our organization's work is to address Islamophobia and to hold public leaders accountable, elected officials accountable, and make sure that they are striking the right tone when it comes to talking about diverse faith communities, not only Muslims, obviously, but also other faith communities as well. And just by virtue of the fact that our own communities are so diverse, it naturally makes it so much easier, and it's a natural kind of a progression for us to work in collaboration and partnership with other faith communities as well, because a lot of the issues that impact and that are directly affecting other communities also impact the Muslim community in different ways. So knowing that Islamophobia has become so normalized and encouraged in so many different sectors of society has made it such a priority for our organization to push back against it. Unfortunately, there are numerous efforts underway across the country to limit the impact and influence of those who are promoting these virulent kind of ideologies. However, what the national conversation often misses is the impact of this toxicity, especially on our youngest community members, on children. And in fact, my organization's chapter in California publishes reports on the incidence and prevalence of bullying of Muslim children within in California public schools. And that report, and their latest report, indicated that about approximately 50% of Muslim children enrolled in California's public school system indicated that they had been bullied or harassed or targeted because of their religion. We believe that that's reflective of many other states across the country. And we believe that that's probably actually an underreporting of what the actual number is. Unfortunately, we know oftentimes when it comes to bullying, there's shaming and stigma associated with it, where many children often don't feel comfortable, or they don't find themselves in a space where they can feel vulnerable enough to, comfortable enough being vulnerable about their reality. And so from CARE's perspective, the reports that indicate Muslim children are shouldering the burden of Islamophobia, as well as the fact that preliminary research shows that Muslim children face bullying at twice the rate of the national average, is something that has kind of compelled our organization to make this a priority. Of course, this year with COVID, the fact that this pandemic has affected our lives in so many different ways, and virtual learning now being implemented in so many school systems across the country, if not every school system, the prevalence of bullying has now shifted to cyberbullying more so than it is actual peer-to-peer aggression in the school space. But one of the key priorities that CARE is exploring right now is strengthening the Safe Schools Act in Maryland specifically. So we've been in touch with a few different lawmakers about ways that we can strengthen anti-bullying laws within the state that not only would enhance and boost the safety and security of Muslim children, but all children, especially because we know oftentimes, for example, Sikh children are often mistaken for being Muslim because there's just so many people who don't know better. They see a Muslim or they see a Sikh student and they assume that they're Muslim or what have you. So we want to work in a way that helps to strengthen these laws for children of all backgrounds. We're also working with lawmakers to understand, what the current situation is. Right now, unfortunately, there isn't very accurate data on what the incidence of bullying is of children within our school system. We know that obviously our state mandates that educators report incidents of bullying when it occurs. However, we know that it is underreported. And in fact, many of the cases that my organization handles is of children who have in fact been bullied or harassed or who've experienced intolerance at the hands of educators and school administrators who themselves are in positions of authority who actually should be the ones responsible for making sure students do feel safe. So the three components that we are addressing are peer-to-peer aggression, bullying, of course, as well as training on diversity and inclusion, mandating diversity on training on diversity and equity and inclusion for teachers and administrators, as well as curriculum quality control and verification and enhancement on issues related to Islam and Muslims in the areas of social studies and current affairs. I know I'm running out of time. There's actually several different other priority items that CARE is going to be exploring in the upcoming General Assembly session. Of course, these include
and I'm sorry, let me do this, Zainab. Let me come back to you to talk a little bit more about how individuals can connect with you and hear a little bit more about some of these priorities. I need to just switch gears for a second, but we definitely want to come back and learn more about how we can engage and a little bit more about what those key issues are, okay?
That's great, Brooke. And I do also want to touch on the fact that police reform is a key priority for CARE as well. So repealing LIBOR, making sure that we are seeking police reform and accountability. There's also a Child Interrogation Protection Act that is intended to protect minors it's sponsored by Delegate Learman in the last session that we are hoping to have reintroduced in the 2021 session. That's also going to be a key priority for CARE as well, which would require that law enforcement officers who take a child into custody provide notice to their parents or guardians before they interrogate them, as well as a whole host of other bills as well.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Now we need to go ahead and switch gears to Kat from CASA. Let's hear from you. What do you all have going on at CASA? What are your key issue areas? How can individuals connect? No, you're still muted. You're still muted, honey. Can you unmute yourself?
There we go. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Thank you so much, Brooke, and thank you for having me. It's so great to have so many people on tonight, learning about what can happen on a statewide level and what we can work together to accomplish. So as Brooke mentioned, my name is Cathryn. You can call me Kat. I am the Research and Policy Analyst at CASA, and so I handle all of our Maryland advocacy. CASA, if you're not familiar with our organization, CASA is the largest immigrant advocacy organization in Maryland. We have over 100,000 members, immigrants and working families. We have a ton of Latino, Latinx families, but a lot of immigrants, as you know, are coming to Maryland. So we're representing immigrants from all over the country, all over Maryland. We are really excited for this legislative session because, as you guys know, the past 4 years has been very, very difficult for immigrant communities under an administration that ran and led an anti-immigrant campaign. And of course, immigrants have suffered deeply during this pandemic, and they are just the groups that have, especially undocumented immigrants, that have not had access to unemployment. They never got that one stimulus check in the mail, right? They've been completely left out of the CARES Act, and many undocumented immigrants do not have access to health care, leaving them in some really, really difficult and challenging times. And so I'm really excited for the General Assembly to get back to work because there's a lot of work that needs to be done and a lot of relief that needs to get to our immigrant families. So I know we're short on time. I'm going to talk to you guys really briefly for a minute or two about some upcoming bills that you might be interested in or you might want to support. The first one is called the Maryland Trust Act. The Maryland Trust Act is a bill that would keep the police from partnering up with ICE. As you know, ICE has been coming into our communities, terrorizing and targeting immigrants. This would make sure that the police and other law enforcement are not working hand in hand with ICE. One of the other things that this bill would do is it would keep ICE from going into sensitive locations like schools and courthouses and hospitals, right? And as you can imagine, during this pandemic, undocumented families should go to the hospital, right? And not be afraid to go to the hospital because of fear of deportation. And that has to do with not just their safety, but the safety of all of us. We want to make sure that parents can take their kids to school without the fear of deportation. And these are some of the basics that the Trust Act covers. If you guys are interested, I would love to talk to you more about it. We feel really confident that this is going to move forward this session. One of the other bills that I wanted to mention is the Dignity Not Detention Act. If you guys aren't familiar with it, this is a bill that would cut off state and local government's role in building and operating private immigration detention centers. So some of you guys might know this, but private prisons are banned in Maryland, right? We Marylanders and our Maryland legislators, we don't believe in profiting off of people, right? So we already agree on that, but unfortunately, that does not cover immigration detention centers. There are currently 3 in Maryland, and one of them is actually in Howard County. So if anyone has been following the Howard County detention actions that have been happening, there's a bill, I think that was voted on yesterday. This bill would cut off the Howard County Detention Center to make sure that Howard County Jail is not partnering with ICE to detain immigrants and profit off of them. So that's another big bill that's on the radar. And then finally, I'll mention one more. It is this bill that would protect the privacy of Maryland drivers. Some of you guys might remember this. Back in 2013, Maryland passed a bill that would allow undocumented immigrants to get their driver's license. So if you're undocumented, you can get your driver's license. And that was done for a lot of reasons. Like I mentioned earlier, so that families could take their kids to school, so that they could not have to make the decision between driving without a license and taking care of their family. In addition to, of course, making our roads safer. Now, what we have seen, while that bill in 2013 was passed with a really positive and the best of intentions, ICE has taken advantage of that bill, and they have started going into the MBA data and targeting immigrants and taking their data to find them and deport them. And so this is a bill that would keep the MBA from sharing data with ICE, unless they have a warrant, of course, unless they have some kind of valid reason to search them. So that's a bill that I hope you guys, if you've been following, I hope you guys will contribute to. And I'll say there's so many great bills that were mentioned by the amazing panelists earlier. I mean, police reform is one of the top priorities. We've got to all come together on that, as well as housing. No one should be evicted during the state of emergency or at all, but especially during a pandemic. So we're going to be working on a bill that would keep people from being evicted during the pandemic. It would keep landlords from raising rent during the pandemic and charging late fees to people who can't pay the rent to begin with because they lost their jobs due to COVID. So there's so much that's going on next session, and we really need everyone's support to get it done. So thank you so much, Brooke. If you guys have any questions, looking forward to answering them and talking more about these bills.
Thank you so much. And just a reminder, please shoot me your questions. We look forward to getting to those after we hear from Mr. Flowers. So with that, Willie, take it away.
Good evening, Brooke. Thanks, everybody. I think everything's been said, but as people know, I represent the NAACP Maryland State Count Conference. I always like to remind people that we're the largest and the oldest, the baddest and the boldest, the most loved, the most hated, the most feared and revered, most cussed and discussed civil rights organization on the planet. So as that goes, we're still on the forefront, and like never before, I know that everybody is kind of emotionally driven by all the details of police reform, but what we're looking at as a pivot, because I think that while this next legislative session is extremely important, like any legislative session is, we have to begin to look at what's going to happen in 2022. Who's running for governor, what we should be pitching to them, and what that should look like. And if we healed all the police are great, all the everybody's been, whatever you do to police officers who are bad, because we have those challenges. We still have a community and a reality where Black African men, Black African people are being known for this time in history about how we die and not how we live. And that's the counter to any civilized society. And the solution, like I said, the pivot out of that is to talk about economic justice and not just racial justice without the padding of what you can do to stabilize it. And what economic justice looks like is education for everybody and valuing every single person. Because when we get into these situations, we expect people to show up perfect. I know Brooke is at a library, so you got to know how to read to come in there. Well, the fact is everybody can't do everything, but we have to value people and make sure they have a place in our society so they can see and figure out, because everybody doesn't get it on the first time. And if the opportunities are not there, they won't get it. And I always like to say, if Stephen King didn't learn how to read and write and love it, he would be a serial killer somewhere. And so I believe that if we give every child an opportunity, then we have a better society. And that speaks to employment opportunities. I work in Baltimore City and I see children every day who all they want is an opportunity. It's not about crime or doing crime. It's about they never had opportunity in the first place. And that speaks to what was spoken of earlier about not just renting, but home ownership and that type of equity, so that you can stabilize your thing. And then we're throwing this conversation about financial literacy in there, so you can keep the money that you got and know what to do with it long term. And we always miss, because like I said, we take the air out of the room, we start talking about this, the emotional issues, and we need to talk about them because they are civil rights issues, but we miss it. If anybody saw 60 Minutes the other night, they had a full-scale conversation about how China is strategically, forget about reform, all this we talk about COVID and China and all this. They're talking about how they're going to take over artificial intelligence forever. And they're doing it through TikTok, without us even knowing it. So these types of matters is where we need to be. But if we don't have the opportunities, we can't play there. So we're not talking about coding as a second language. You're not talking about any of the details of community-based opportunities to teach young people how to code and hack and appreciate drones, and also to appreciate robotics. All these pieces happen when we value young people, value their families, and give them a role in society. And then, and I want to connect this to one of the bills. There's a bill that we're going to be working on. It's the return of the health enterprise zones. and health enterprise zones strategically put health care agencies in communities, and then start talking about the reality of revitalizing social determinants of health. And while it's a part of the bill to keep people healthy, the reality is that we should be building, I guess, public work systems so that people in the communities can work in anything where we're correcting social determinants of health, be it transportation in the streets, be it housing and creating housing, be in commercial centers, and them not just building those facilities, but also having the contracts to work in them, and then bringing the equity to that. So all these pieces are things that we need to look at, because this stage that we in, and let me also mention here, when we're talking about sentencing and aggressive sentencing, when the crime bill happened, and nobody talks about this much except the campaign for fair sentencing for youth, the bill also threw young people in as teenagers for life sentences. So they're working on a bill to end life sentences for teenagers, which it's not hard to believe. But if you remember that time, everything was on the table, and we're feeling the effects of it now. And we have to collaborate if we're going to save our society. Talk about valuing people. If you want to see an example of how you didn't value anybody, you throw a teenager in there into prison for the rest of their lives. So all these pieces are there. These are pieces that we'll be working with. The returning citizen thing is important because the flawed crime bill that we know about damaged a lot of people. We're dealing with PTSD and inability just to get a decent job. And then we're setting forth what we also have to do at a grassroots, as grassroots institutions, is to be careful of this ritual of just following behind the crowd without giving people something to leave, go home with. And we should be talking about economic justice. If we do not do it, we set up a situation where we continue what we've been crying about, but we walk away with nothing. So all these pieces are important. I do plan to amplify these as we pivot to campaign 2022. It's extremely important. And I want to close by this. Stacey Abrams gave us the formula for how to move beyond these normal Democratic campaigns where people only focus on the super voters, because you're just going to elect the same people. So I encourage every young person who's listening, I don't care if you're young, old, whatever you're doing, I encourage you to look at a district that you can represent. If you feel like your elected official is not representing you well, not valuing the people, then I encourage you to do what they were talking about earlier, mobilize everybody else, because everybody else in that district can beat those super voters. And Stacey Abrams showed you that. So and that's where we're at. I want to jump off with that. I do want to also add here that there's a bill by Delegate Nick Charles. It's around this whole subject of the Karen Act, or the Karen bill, where folks just call the police for any old reason and then create a situation where people can literally die. That's something that we'll be working on. That's a part of the police reform bill, but it's a larger issue about social determinants as well, because of this fear we have in certain neighborhoods, and the most significant thing you can do is weaponize the police. So that's kind of where we are.
Willie, let's do this. As we get ready to transition into questions, can I have you talk a little bit about what you mean by the social determinants of health? I want to make sure everyone is clear on what that is.
So social determinants of health are all those pieces in communities that determine your health outcomes. It can start with your zip code. It can start with your education attainment. It starts with your employment, your housing situation, whether you rent or own. It can even be technology, because we learned in this period that if children did not have devices going into COVID, they were going to be shut off from education. So that disables them, in addition to the whole conversation about Wi-Fi and lack of access. So all these pieces can determine how you live if for 1 month. I mean, so we're dealing with now people who have shut off notices and this type of thing because their parents couldn't go to work. So all this stuff speaks to social determinants of health, and it's something that we can work, because we have pitfalls, not just in the Baltimore City, and we can talk about food apartheid with that, but we also have them in Howard County, where in certain areas of Howard County, you wouldn't believe this, don't have quality grocery stores because
Absolutely.
and these types of realities happen where Black and brown people assemble.
All right. Thank you so much, Willie. So let me do this. So a lot of critical information, another powerful information-packed panel. Let me go to a few questions that have come up from the audience, and then let's close out. Doing a quick time check here. We've got about 16 minutes left, and there's some things we have to do at the end. Just a reminder again, of course, we are being recorded. And again, after this, there will be information sent out. There will be some links sent out, and this video will be available on YouTube. We hope you share it with your friends as well. So let me just jump to a few questions that have come up. One is to Kat, I believe. It is from Monica. What was the bill that is going to keep ICE from using MVA records? You spoke on that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. The bill that I mentioned earlier is a bill, I think the title is like limiting ICE enforcement or something with MVA data. Don't worry about the actual title. Once the bill is actually introduced, I'll be happy to share with you guys the actual bill number and all the information and the final bill itself. But what the bill does is it requires ICE to obtain a warrant before they can dip into personal information about drivers in the MVA. And that's not just undocumented immigrants, that is any driver. So right now, not just ICE, but any federal agency can put in a password and log on to this system that shares a ton of different data between different agencies. And they can kind of just scroll through, browse through, and target people. And find their personal information that way without any reason, right? So what this bill does is it requires them to have a reason. If you're undocumented and you have your license, you should be able to drive unless there's a reason for law enforcement to come and find you.
Thank you. We have another question here. Could you all please share what your opinion or position is on the school resource officers that Howard County is looking to, that they've been debating on? What are your opinions on the school resource officers in Howard County if you've been following this issue?
I can chime in there. I'm in a very interesting position of running the state conference NAACP. So we have a situation where we have branches in all the counties in the state, except Garrett County. And so what I have done with my leadership has, is encourage all branches who have different relationship with the police and with school districts and all of that to determine what's best for them. It just happens that I'm also a branch president in Howard County, and I've worked for the last 4 years trying to understand this whole SRO thing. And I've done some deep investigation in it, toured, I've went, and what I found was that while nobody believes in aggressive policing at schools, and we can do away with that, but we can't remove the ability of police, who are the only people who work 24 hours, to get nestled into what they do because they know the families. One particular officer, her name is Dr. Littlefield. She had more information about the families in Wild Lake, between Hickory Ridge and Wild Lake, than anybody I ever met. Not only did she know that the family relationship and why they were in the county, but also knew their families in Baltimore City. And she was able and positioned not just to, this wasn't a subject about policing, it was a subject about a human services component that is overlooked when we start attacking officers in school. And because of what they have as a role in the community, and I think that Howard County, I'll add, has superb openness to community policing based on the leadership of Chief Myers, but they have the capacity. I think we should encourage the ability to transform what we see as policing into a human services case management profile that would be for the advanced role of giving students the resources they need in the schools. So I think that while you know, there's negative viewpoint about it, there's all this controversy about it, I think that if we work together, we can make that system work for the students who really need it.
Okay, thank you, Willie. Kat or Zainab, anything you would like to add to this conversation? If not, I'll pivot to the next question.
Yeah, I'll just add that the Howard County bill, CASA has not formally taken a position on it, but we have taken a position on removing SROs statewide, and we are in support of doing that. We are still in the process of engaging our many members on how they feel about this, how it affects them. But I will say from all of our youth and leadership groups, all of the youth that we've worked with at CASA are in support of removing SROs. And so we have been active in Montgomery County and in the fights in some of the other states, and look forward to seeing how Howard County moves on this.
Thank you, Kat. So I'm going to shift now.
Greg, if I can just quickly add to a little bit.
Actually, yes, I was going to come to you because not just for this, but I know we had to cut you off a little bit earlier. So please, we want to hear how we can support some more of your initiatives at the state level. And we need to find out how we can plug in to your organization. And then I'll close out with both Willie and Kat on how we can plug into your organizations as well.
Of course. No, thank you so much for the extra time. So I'm actually going to just talk a little bit about the SRO piece, because I think that that's more relevant, especially in Howard County, because that is an ongoing conversation. So there's actually a CRSD, the Coalition to Reform School Discipline, that's working to kind of collaborate and bring together different movements in different counties across the state, because there are different efforts going on in different counties. I know in Montgomery County, there was a bill that was just introduced, I believe, this week, if I'm not mistaken. Baltimore County also has a movement actively. CARE was part of a coalition to hold a town hall to talk more about what removing SROs from schools would look like. And so there's actually going to be, I believe, legislation that's going to be proposed in the 2021 session that we are encouraging our communities to support. And there's actually an effort to bring together these different movements, not only to just be able to learn from one another, but also help to amplify and uplift and support the efforts in these respective counties, so that especially the youth-led movements where young people who are in schools who are directly impacted by these policies have an opportunity to weigh in. Somebody mentioned earlier that when you testify in Annapolis to lawmakers, that's really impactful. Same as with this particular issue, our lawmakers, our county level, local level lawmakers need to hear from young people on what their positions are. And CARE as an organization strongly supports youth-led movements, specifically where young people have the opportunity to amplify and share their personal experiences. And there's so much research done on this particular issue. In fact, one report that was shared earlier showed that a study of 13 schools with an SRO and 15 schools without an SRO found that schools that had an SRO had nearly 5 times the number of arrests for disorderly conduct as schools without an SRO. And predominantly, we know the vast majority of disciplinary action impacts specifically African-American students and students of color. So this is definitely an issue that's really high on our radar as well.
All right, thank you. And how can people get involved with your organization?
Yeah, of course. So I shared in the chat my contact information. That's my personal cell phone as well as my email address. We are also recruiting interns, and you do not have to be Muslim. We had a student who reached out who was like, do I have to be Muslim to intern? And I said, no, you don't. You just have to be very passionate about social justice issues across the board for different groups. And so we would love to hear from you. Even if you can't be an intern, but you would like to volunteer, we have opportunities to volunteer as well. And thank you again to the Howard County Library System for providing this platform to have these conversations. And we really look forward to working with all of you in the community to move our state forward in terms of equity.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Kat, let's hear from you. How can people get engaged and involved with your organization?
Thank you, Brooke. Guys, I put all of my contact information in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. If you check our website, you'll see information, petitions you can sign, events that you can join. And I also put in the chat a registration link and some background information for an event that is happening this Thursday. And we'll be doing a teach-in on that Dignity Not Detention bill that I mentioned that would affect the Howard County Detention Center and keep the county from profiting off of immigrants. And I'll put one last thing in the chat. On December 10th, we are hosting another teach-in that just deals with Annapolis 101. So if you really want to understand how does a bill become law in Maryland, what's the process, who are all the players, right? This would be a great event for you to join, where we'll also cover how to testify, how to reach your legislators, and all of that kind of stuff. So looking forward to having you join.
Excellent. Thank you, Kat. And Willie Flowers, please share with us how you can get involved with the NAACP. And I know you have opportunities for young people as well as
Yeah, we got it up and down. So I put my stuff in the chat. If you want to hit me up, please do so. State conference information is there. If you're in Howard County, we're howardcountynAACP.com. And we actually, I saw Dawn pop on here. Dawn helped to recruit our first football team. We do a flag football game versus the police each year, but it was canceled this year because of coronavirus. But we do, you can save the date. I think it's, got to pay some bills. You can save January 16th is our MLK 5K. It's virtual this year. I thought I saw Mr. Wheatland on. He's going to be our race director this year. I thought I saw him. And so those exciting things, but we're kicking off our pivoting to the legislative session, but we'll also be introducing the Matthias D'Souza Symposium, where if you know anything about Matthias D'Souza, he was the first African-American person of color elected to the Maryland General Assembly in the St. Mary's Colony. He's kind of been kicked off to the curb of history, but we want to recognize his legacy. So be on the lookout for that. But you can join our branch anytime. You can join the national organization, contact the branch, go to our website for a membership. We need members, and look forward for a strong future.
Excellent, thank you. Let's give a round of applause for our second dynamic powerhouse panel. And to all of our panelists, thank you so much, everyone, for spending time with us this evening to share about your various issues and your organizations, the different policies that you're engaged in. Again, we're going to be sharing out everything that was shared in the chat. Willie, we got a request for you to please share the link to the MLK 5K. So if you don't have that right now, we can see if we can get that by the time we email out the information to everyone. So we are now going to